My mother wired $11,000 to a bail bondsman because she genuinely believed she heard my voice crying on the phone, telling her I had been in a car accident and needed help immediately before I could be released from custody. I had been sitting in a work meeting the entire time that call happened, phone in my bag, completely unaware anyone had impersonated me until my mother called 2 hours later asking whether I was okay now. My name is Priya Nair. I was 32. I hosted a small weekly podcast about home renovation with roughly 40,000 regular listeners, and the voice my mother heard crying and begging for help was not actually a recording of me at all. It only sounded exactly like me. Before I tell you what a cybersecurity investigator eventually traced that voice back to, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching this from tonight. My mother, Lakshmi, lived alone since my father passed 3 years earlier, sharp-minded, careful with money, not someone I would have described as an easy target for a scam. When she called that afternoon asking if I was safe now, I genuinely thought she had confused me with someone else entirely, until she described the call in specific, devastating detail, my exact voice, crying, saying I had hit another car, that I was being held until bail was posted, that I needed her to wire money immediately to a number a supposed officer then provided directly on the same call. Stay with me, because understanding exactly how convincing that voice actually is the only way to understand why my mother, someone genuinely difficult to fool, sent that money within 11 minutes of picking up the phone. I filed a police report immediately, though the responding officer explained gently that these particular scams, built using cloned voices generated from publicly available audio, had become increasingly common and were notoriously difficult to trace once the money moved through the wire transfer system. I mentioned my podcast almost as an afterthought, then watched the officer's expression change slightly. He asked how many hours of my voice existed publicly online. I had never actually calculated it before that moment. 4 years of weekly episodes, easily over 200 hours of clean, high-quality audio, more than enough raw material for any modern voice cloning software to build a convincing replica from. I hired a cybersecurity investigator named Foster Marsh, who specialized in fraud tracing, mostly out of a desperate need to understand exactly how violated I actually was, beyond simply the money itself. Foster explained that voice cloning technology had become disturbingly accessible, requiring only a few minutes of clean audio to generate a convincing synthetic voice capable of saying anything at all, in real time, during an actual phone call. Here is something I would genuinely love your honest opinion on in the comments. If a scammer used your own public voice, from a podcast, a video, an interview, to convincingly impersonate you and target someone you love, would you hold yourself even slightly responsible for having that voice publicly available in the first place? Or does that thought simply blame the wrong person entirely? Foster traced the wire transfer through several layers before it eventually dead-ended at an account quickly emptied and closed within hours of my mother's payment. What he found instead, digging through metadata on the audio clip itself, an audio clip my mother had fortunately not deleted from her phone in her panic, was a distinctive digital watermark left behind by a specific, less common voice cloning platform, one requiring a paid subscription tied to a verified email address. That email address, once Foster connected it through a data breach database containing millions of previously leaked account credentials, belonged to someone I recognized immediately. A former podcast guest named Desmond Ruiz, a contractor I had interviewed 18 months earlier for a single episode about kitchen renovation costs. Someone I had exchanged maybe a dozen friendly messages with afterward before losing touch entirely. I could not initially understand any motive at all. Foster eventually found it buried in a civil court filing from the previous year, a lawsuit where Desmond had been ordered to pay significant damages after a botched renovation job left a different client with extensive water damage. He was, according to the filing, deeply in debt at the exact time my mother received that call. Confronting him directly felt necessary despite Foster's advice to let law enforcement handle it entirely. Desmond eventually admitted, once shown the traced email and subscription records, that he had specifically targeted people connected to public voices, podcast hosts, YouTube creators, anyone whose extensive audio existed freely online. Building a small operation targeting elderly parents specifically because the emotional urgency of a child's crying voice consistently produced faster, larger payments than any other scam variation he had previously attempted. I was not his only victim. Foster's continued investigation, shared formally with the fraud division handling my case, eventually connected Desmond to at least 6 other similar incidents across 3 states, each one using a different public figure's cloned voice against their own parent or grandparent. Desmond was eventually charged with wire fraud and identity-related offenses across multiple jurisdictions, facing consolidated federal charges given the number of separate victims and the interstate nature of the scheme. My mother's $11,000 was never fully recovered, though a restitution order was included as part of his eventual plea agreement, one that will apparently take years to meaningfully repay given the total damages across every identified victim. I stopped publishing new podcast episodes for nearly 4 months afterward, genuinely unsure whether continuing to put my voice publicly online simply handed future scammers new raw material to build from. Eventually, I returned, though differently, establishing a specific, unusual verbal code word with my mother, something she could ask for on any call claiming to involve an emergency, something no cloned voice built from public audio could ever possibly know to provide. My mother still occasionally apologizes for sending that money so quickly, and I still remind her that the entire design of that scam existed specifically to exploit exactly the kind of love and instant response she gave without hesitation, the same instant response any parent would give hearing their own child's voice in genuine distress. The scam worked precisely because her love was real, not because her judgment was somehow weaker than it should have been. We talk now about how strange it is that the same technology capable of restoring lost voices for people who cannot speak, the same technology used to help people communicate after illness or injury, can be aimed in exactly the opposite direction with nothing more than a public podcast feed and a few minutes of patience. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Unheard Drama Stories and let me know in the comments where you are watching from, along with whether you think public figures and creators should be doing more to protect their own voices from exactly this kind of misuse.